This week, we celebrate the hope that is ours because God came near to us in Jesus, and because Jesus is coming back to fix everything. During Advent, we remember Israel's waiting and longing for Jesus the Messiah, their and our only hope for liberation from sin and restored relationship with God. And we remember that we are still waiting. When we look at the world around us that is still broken and subject to sin and death, we hold fast to our hope that Jesus is alive, that he is at work today establishing his kingdom on earth, and that one day he will return to make all things new. Isaiah 9:2, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned.
Good morning, Anchor. So good to be with you. Happy first Sunday of Advent. Do we do Happy Advent? Is that something people say? I guess it is now. Yeah, it is now. Hey, if you're maybe new to this word Advent, here's what it means. It means to approach. And so in Advent, we celebrate the approach of God coming near to us in the form of a baby in a manger, Jesus. But not only do we celebrate his approach towards us, we also celebrate and look forward to joining in with the Magi, the wise men, as they approach the Christ child. So there's these mutual approachings, God to us and us to him, and that is what Advent is about. As we look towards Christmas, we're approaching that day with expectation and anticipation. And I would say that Christmas without Advent loses the significance because there isn't this cultivation of anticipation. There isn't this weekly reminder of what it is all about. And so it becomes easy to get sucked into the consumptive elements of this season and forget the most important person in this season. But not only, though, is Advent about God's approach to us in the form of Jesus in the manger and our approach to him, but it's also about the continuing building of anticipation of when he will come and make all things new. And so for each week in this Advent teaching series, we are looking at these prophetic passages found in the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament. Now, if you're new to Scripture, if the Bible is new to you, Isaiah is this prophet that God gave messages to, and he wrote them down and shared them with Israel. And a lot of the messages that God gave to Isaiah were actually messages about the coming of Jesus hundreds of years in the future. So one of the cool things for me that gives me a level of comfort and encouragement when there are maybe questions with my faith and people ask questions that I don't always have answers to, I can look towards the book of Isaiah, which clearly describes these prophetic pictures of Jesus hundreds of years before he ever existed. And there's this encouragement, this picture and this confidence that God is mysteriously active, but clearly evident. So we're looking at 4 passages in Isaiah that look towards either the coming reign of Jesus that we all are still looking forward to, or the birth of Jesus in this Advent series. Now, I want to say that like in each of these weeks, you're going to find more description than prescription. You know what those two things and how they're different are, right? Description is the describing of things, the articulation of what is seen and is visible. And prescription is do this, take this many pills, do this next week at the right time according to the prescription and description whatever that I'm giving you. What you're going to find in Isaiah, in the passage I'm just about to read here, is that Isaiah is just letting us in on what he saw when God opened his eyes to the power of God and the reign of God and the rule of God. And so what we do is we get a glimpse of who God is, what he's like, and we get to savor it. We get to appreciate it. We get to take note of it. So this will be less go do these 5 things, and more, just take note of who God is and what God is like. So in Isaiah chapter 2, verses 1 to 5, we read this. This is what Isaiah, son of Amoz, saw. He witnessed something. He saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established at the highest of mountains. It will be exalted above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. Many people will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, so that we may walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem, and he will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. And nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. Come, descendants of Jacob, let us walk in the light of the Lord." There's this picture of it says of all peoples, which is significant because in Israel, in this day, Israel was a certain small nation in what we call the Middle East today. There were bigger forces. Egypt was stronger, and Babylon and Assyria and Greece and Rome, they were all stronger than Israel. And Israel had this belief in this creator God named Yahweh, and they thought that they were right and everybody else was wrong. And it's true, kind of they were, even though they messed up and did a lot of dumb things. They had this insight into who God was because God had revealed himself to Israel. But Israel sometimes felt pretty good about themselves and was easy to kind of develop some religious pride because we know who God is and other people don't know who God is. And here Isaiah is saying there's going to be a day where everybody, all people, will be coming towards me, streaming in. Think about that, the beauty of that. All the colors of skin and languages, all the different countries represented, all the different socioeconomic statuses, everybody's streaming in. Years ago, actually it was 2010, it was right after the Haiti earthquake. I don't know if you remember that. I led a mission trip to Haiti. And there was ruin and devastation everywhere. And I remember this scene, many things I remember clearly, but I remember this scene. We were taken towards nearly the epicenter of the earthquake. And the guide brought us kind of off the trail, about 3 miles off the main road. And there, we walked past this site that is still in my head. There were about 30 or 40 Haitians. We're talking mamas and dads and kids and teens. And they're all huddled around this, must have been a 13-inch television. Somehow they had power, somehow they got reception, and they were all dressed up in Brazil soccer jerseys. And they were watching through the staticky picture of this World Cup game that was taking place in South Africa. And I don't think Brazil was playing. And I definitely know Haiti wasn't playing because they weren't even in the World Cup. But these two teams were playing. None of them, weren't their main teams because they were all wearing Brazil shirts. And I just saw look, this is just fascinating. 3 miles off the road, there's these Haitians wearing Brazil soccer jerseys, watching people play in South Africa, and they aren't even their teams, but they're fixed and they're excited and they're passionate. It was almost this picture of all these nations kind of gathering together, even if it's just through things like television. But all these nations represented there. Maybe you've been watching some of the World Cup. We spent some of our Thanksgiving watching some highlights because I don't know what channel has it and I don't have access to it. But we managed to watch some highlights, and my son Soren is a budding soccer star, so we were trying to look at the moves they were making, and they were all admittedly lost on us. But one of the things that's been cool is taking a look at some of these images of all these people with all these different flags and all of this excitement, and they're converging in this one place, Qatar, to just celebrate and have fun. It actually is kind of totally, to be honest, beautiful. It's almost as if for a brief second, all of the challenges and travail in the world are forgotten, and there is this convergence of all peoples in this one place. Of course, we know that there's much more happening around the world, and there's wars, and there's all this. So it's an incomplete picture. But I want us to maybe get a glimpse of that, and then transpose that on what Isaiah is seeing. Rather than everybody converging on this one place for a soccer tournament, they're all converging on this one place because this is where God is found. All manner of languages, all ethnicities, all people with different values and beliefs, and some people with like values that conflict with other values. They're all going this direction. It's this language, actually, it says there, it's in the first verse there, it says, this is what the son of Isaiah, son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. Check this out. In the last days, the mountain of the Lord's temple will be established as the highest of mountains, meaning that there's these other attempts of greatness, but it'll be clear that where God dwells is the greatest thing. And it will be exalted above all the hills, and all the nations will stream to it. It's this like the mirror image of Black Friday, where everybody's huddled outside Walmart at a god-awful hour and trying to looking at everybody else's competition. Like you're ahead of me, I'm gonna elbow you. And there's YouTube videos of the worst of Black Friday. Go look them up and you'll be horrified at humanity. But it's like the mirror image of Black Friday, because in Black Friday, everybody's competition, and here everybody's streaming towards in this sense of finding unity at the God that they're coming towards. And there is this magnetism towards God. There's this magnetism towards the presence of God. You get a glimpse of it because it's the nation. It says the nations will stream to him. The nations will stream to this place. And Isaiah is wanting us to kind of get a glimpse of a river flowing upwards. And rivers, I don't know if you know this. You may not have studied geography or geology or whatever the science is that I'm about to try to describe. But rivers typically don't flow upwards. And so Isaiah is wanting to say God's presence will be so magnetic, it will be so powerful that it's like a river can't stop but flow upwards towards it. This is what's being described. I remember when I was a college pastor years ago, we had this internship, and we were talking about a similar theme of this. It was, rather than Isaiah, though, it's in Revelation. And maybe you're familiar with this passage where it says, all tribes and tongues will be gathered around Jesus and worshiping Jesus and understanding that he's the one with whom our true joy is found in, and celebrating this fact, this beautiful reality. And it'll be the center point, the focus point. And as I was talking with the interns about this, I looked at one of our interns, and this particular intern, I had a close relationship with, so I felt like I could challenge him a bit. And he was the guy that everybody knew how he voted. I don't know if you know, he had the shirts to demonstrate who he voted for, and he had the Facebook posts to prove who he voted for, and the bumper sticker to prove who he voted for. And I knew that he was very committed to this particular political affiliation and the persons that represented that political affiliation. And I said, how will it feel for you when you're in heaven worshiping next to somebody that may have voted differently than you? Will it be weird? He had a moment, took a breath, and said something to the effect of, I guess it won't matter at that point. You see, when all types of people gather together, and not because of they all happen to share a last name, and so they have to gather for Thanksgiving, otherwise mom will feel bad. But all types of people gather together because they want to, because the center of what they're gathering around is God. All of the other elements that might compete and cause conflict, they start to drip away. Because the focus isn't the differences, the focus is what they have in common. And all of those differences add to this beautiful mosaic window that's being created around the throne of God. And that is what Isaiah sees. It's interesting that like many people, leaders and throughout history, and nations and presidents and kings and CEOs have tried to create this reality where we could just create a reality where everybody comes around and feels secure and safe, and all the attempts in some way or another fall flat. What are we reaching for? The picture is ultimately found in what Isaiah saw. It is around the throne that all the people find their true identity as they see the true king. The scripture goes on, it says, many people will come and say, come, let us go to the mountain of the Lord, to the temple of the God of Jacob. And check this out. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his paths. I'm going to read that again. He will teach us his ways so that we may walk in his paths. Here's the principle here. We go to God to learn his ways. We don't go to God to show him how great we are. I remember when I wasn't a Jesus follower yet, but I was invited to this youth group back in 98 or so. The youth group was called The Rock because in the 90s, you named all youth groups after like a second tier club would be called, So I'm there at The Rock, and the youth pastor says, everybody get together in groups of 5 and pray. And I didn't really know how to pray. I don't know if you've ever felt awkward praying aloud. I think it's a pretty common thing. I don't think I'd really ever prayed aloud in a public setting before. I remember praying before I went to bed. Even when I considered myself an atheist, I would pray before I went to bed, a weird thing for a little young teenage atheist to do, but I did it. But I'd never prayed aloud. And there I was in this group of 3 to 5, and of course the most beautiful girl in The Rock was sitting right next to me, and all of us had to pray aloud together for something that I forget about. And I remember getting out this jumble of words that was probably closer to praying in tongues than anything else. And on the way home, my friend said, what happened to you there? Usually you have like an element of eloquence, but you just totally fell flat. And it was this mixture of me being right next to that girl and not knowing how to pray aloud, and I just bumbled my way through it. And I think lots of us can relate to that emotional experience where it's like maybe in a classroom, like the teacher calls on us and we don't know the answer and we just have to say, I don't know, and our face gets red, and the second the class ends, we run out of the room and we're looking for the bathroom because not knowing equals feeling shame. I think the way oftentimes the world works is that if you don't know, you don't add up. But here, what we see is he will teach us his ways so we may walk in his paths. Meaning that everybody that's streaming in, carrying flags from their countries and speaking in different languages, having varieties of political affiliation, they're walking there knowing enough of God to want them to draw near to God, but they don't know everything they need to know. And they're actually celebrating that. You can imagine it being kind of like a chant or like conversation topic. Hey, we don't know everything. We don't know what we need to know, but it's okay because we're going to go to God. He's going to show us what we need to know so we can walk in the ways we need to walk. We don't know what we need to know, but we can find out from God, and he's going to show us how to do it, which is counter to the way the world works. If you confess you don't know in the world, you'll oftentimes be seen as maybe not eligible for promotion. And so we stick our chest out and we say words we don't even really know what they mean because we want to appear confident at all costs. But this group of people that's stumbling towards the king, they're like, we don't know what we don't know everything, and that's cool. How awesome is this? This is what Isaiah saw. That not knowing did not equal shame, but not knowing was actually the ticket to the kingdom. Not knowing was a part of what it meant to be a part of these masses moving towards the one that did know. I was preparing for this, I'm thinking of, when we first launched, we did a teaching series. I think we called it, We're All Learning Here. And And I remember the first few weeks, if you were here, we said together, we're all learning here. Maybe if you were around then, you remember that. By the third week, I could tell nobody wanted to repeat it, We're like, we did it the first two, let's not do it. And so I said it, and I think about 3 other people said it. But I love that as a defining feature of a community. Everyone in here, every one of us here should be able to say, let's go to God because I don't know and he does, and he will teach us what we need to do to walk in his steps. It's not just that there's all peoples together, but that there's this source of peace at the center. It says, the law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He will judge between the nations and will settle disputes for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. I love the fact that it says he will settle the disputes, because as a dad, I am regularly aware of how inept I am at settling disputes, right? Anybody feel me this morning? Like, now, honey, but it sounds like she and he, if you could just see it from their perspective, and it just feels like all futility. They hear, like, Isaiah's like looking into heaven. He's like looking forward, like through all of the challenges and through all the heartache and through everything, he's given a glimpse past all of that to see what heaven looks like. And like, as all these peoples come together, as they move in and river upwards towards God, God is settling all the disputes. Here's typically what here's why disputes and conflict happen. Is because there is the existence of bias and the existence of hard hearts. Conflict happens because there is bias and hard hearts. But around the throne, around the person of God, there is a softening of our hearts, and there is a one who sees without bias, who can settle all disputes. It seems like in this world, it's hard to imagine war stopping. It seems like it's just part of this world. I mean, it's hard to imagine, like, even it's been almost a year that Ukraine and Russia have been in this conflict, and there's plenty of other conflicts around the world, and it's hard to imagine them stopping. Because there's the existence of bias, and there's hard hearts, and there's greed, and there's who knows what else. And it's not just on the macro level, but it's hard to imagine the conflict in the home, whether yours or mine or someone else's or your neighbor's, stopping. Because there's bias and hard hearts and sharp words. But Isaiah sees this picture where all the disputes are settled. I just imagine this book dropping and all the dust flying up in the air, and the matter has been settled. And this is what Isaiah sees. And as the disputes are settled, there's this description of what happens. It says, these swords will be beaten into plowshares. And spears will be turned into pruning hooks. Like, for a long time when I read this passage, I thought that meant that we'd put our swords into some type of farm equipment, and the farm equipment would beat up the sword or something like that. But and I confess, I misread the obvious reading. It's actually much more beautiful. That the swords that we carry, whether literal or metaphorical, God will somehow transform them into an object of destruction, into an object of production. The swords that we carry. And I'm not just talking about actual weapons of war, but our defense mechanisms. You know, the thing when we feel attacked, and we shoot back an icy or hot word like an arrow back at the person. Why do we do it? We do it because we're trying to defend ourselves. We feel like we're encroached upon. We feel like somebody doesn't understand us. We feel hurt and unseen, and so we shoot a little arrow back at somebody. And what Isaiah sees is, he says that the actual weapons of war and the metaphorical weapons of war in God's presence, because the disputes are settled, will be transformed into something that is actually productive rather than destructive. In the London Museum of Art, there's this sculpture. It's called the Tree of Life. You can look it up, after the gathering. And you look at it from a distance, and it just looks like this metal sculpture of the Tree of Life. The Tree of Life referencing the passage in Revelation, the last book in the New Testament, where it says that the Tree of Life, the leaves from the Tree of Life, will be for the healing of the nations. There's this picture of God making this tree that causes everyone to be healed. It's a beautiful, poetic, metaphoric picture. And so this statue is of that tree. And then you look closer at it, and that the tree is made out of decommissioned AK-47s, grenades that are safe, landmines, all from African civil wars. And the artist took all these weapons of war and crafted them into something that is beautiful. But not just beautiful, points to this reality of healing. And what we're reading in Isaiah, what Isaiah saw, is that's what God is in that business. That he takes the things, the defense mechanisms and the sharp words and the antagonism and the competition that tries to push another down so you can get ahead. He somehow takes all of those things and he brings it together like a master artist, and he turns the things that were once destructive into things that are now constructive and productive. This is what happens in heaven. And it says that it's not just that he does that, and it's not just that the wars stop, whether in the living room or in the boardroom or on the actual field of battle in an actual war. It's not just that the wars stop, but it says that they no longer will train for war, realizing that there's no point to it anymore. This is just all of this description of heaven. And I hope that some of it has whet your appetite for the one who alone is fit to rule, Jesus. I love it. Gives us this picture right at the end of this section of what I'm calling hope in the present. It says in verse 5, "Come, descendants of Jacob, let us walk in the light of the Lord." So, just to kind of reframe, Isaiah has seen this beautiful picture, of just unrivaled beauty. And then right at the end, he says, so let's walk in that way now. Let's live in that way now. Come, descendants of Jacob, let's walk in the light of the Lord. So, the only prescription, I guess, that we can offer is that we would take what we saw through Isaiah's vision and integrate that into our now, into a present hope. We would desire, just like people rivered towards God, that as we carry the presence of God and as we are people that carry the Spirit of God within us, if we're a follower of Jesus, Scripture says that we carry the presence of God where we go, that we are the temple of the Holy Spirit. And as we're filled with God and desiring for Him to work in us, that we would find people leaning in towards us as we let go of our defense mechanisms, that people would river towards us, but not just be rivering towards us, be rivering towards what the God that they see glimpses of in us. That we would embrace the humility of not always needing to know. That we would not feel ashamed if we say, I don't know. And sometimes we would say, volunteer, I don't know, but let's go to the one who does. That we would embrace that as an ethic of living. That we would truly say, we're all learning here. And that we would, when we feel in our hearts that the conflict is not settled, with a member of our family, a coworker, a neighbor, or whoever, when we feel that conflict is not settled, that we would take that unsettled conflict and bring it to the one who is alone, unbiased, and can soften our hearts and pray through our anger and conflict so that he can settle the matter and we can walk in the way of peace. And last, that we would allow God to transform our defense mechanisms now. The defense mechanisms that in our insecurity, in our shame, we strike back, in our pain, we push back, that we would surrender those weapons to God and not feel like we have to defend ourselves or prove ourselves, or attack another, but that we would say, name these defense mechanisms and say, God, here they are. Heal me and transform them. The worship team can come on up as we step into this last song. I hope that maybe there's this the whetting of your appetite for the reign of God. So much so that you're wanting to walk in that way right now. You know, the passage where it says right there, beginning of this, it says the highest mountain. There's the place where God dwells will be like a high mountain, and everybody moves towards it. I'm comparing that in my mind with the manger, and how the manger is like the first glimpse we have of this high mountain. And it doesn't seem like it makes sense because it's just a small little manger. But what we see is that there in the manger where the presence of God dwells in the form of a baby, we see all types of people stream towards it. We see wise men that have notoriety and power, perhaps royalty. And we see shepherds that are like rough and tumble dudes. And we see angels. And they're all streaming towards the manger, coming to worship the one who was born, the God who took on flesh, and the humility found in swaddling clothes. Well, that same picture of that humble but powerful God is the one we see on the cross, where he surrendered not just the appearance of his divinity in the manger, but he surrendered his life so that we might experience his life and be welcomed into that. And that's what we celebrate each week at Anchor through the bread and the cup. And you'll hear as you come forward, Christ's body given for you, Christ's blood shed for you. If you're a follower of Jesus or are willing to make that step of becoming a follower of Jesus today, you're invited to come forward, to stream towards the picture of God in his sacrifice. There's also prayer available at both sides of the prayer stations, and come for prayer. We'll be singing a song to call our attention to the greatness of God. But step into, fully embrace, dive into Advent. Develop an anticipation, not just for Christmas, for the day he will come and make all things